Thanks so much for joining me here today on this Inside Fashion webinar. I'm Jane Singer, Managing Director of Inside Fashion and Current Situation in Sourcing. We're going to have a short webinar today. I know everybody's busy, but I did think it was important to take a look at what we see happening with consumer attitudes as we head out of the post-pandemic era. And I'm hoping that is the post-pandemic era. I think that we're definitely heading into better times, but times that are not without their challenges. So if we understand what consumers are thinking, how they might be reacting to some of the challenges ahead, and how we could possibly navigate that, we'll all be in better shape. So let's dive into it. One of the biggest things that we're facing as we're moving out of the post-pandemic era really is a shift in consumer sentiment. I think that's the biggest thing right now. On the one hand, yes, we're very happy to be able to put this pandemic behind us. There's a big pent up demand, of course, for anything that we weren't able to experience during the pandemic. Obviously, any kind of real life entertainment or getting together with other people, being able to go back to stores, to malls, even people who hated shopping were happy to actually go to a mall. A pent up demand also for dressing up a bit more. Not that everybody is 100% moving to very dressed up, but we definitely see a growing demand for things that are other than what we were wearing for the past 2 years. At the same time, right, we are also seeing rising inflation, growing political tensions, and there's no more government subsidies. So that's also putting pressure on consumers. So we need to take these things into consideration, look at them, and understand how they might impact us. I think before we get further into this, I notice, why are so many companies missing key trends? And I think a lot of it is that we live in an environment where we're surrounded by news, which oftentimes is really more noise. And there's so much hype and sensationalism and fear-based media that we really get a distorted view of the market. So, repetition does not equal consensus, but oftentimes that's what you get because as you're looking at your inbox, there's so much pouring in, and it's honestly a little bit difficult to be able to sift and sort what's really happening. So people tend to become very stressed out, very nervous about what they see happening, and jumping from one thing to the next. And a lot of what we work on at Inside Fashion and at Current Situation in Sourcing is really to try to separate the news from the noise, to condense everything down and just look at the facts. So that's what we'll be doing here in this webinar. And just wanted to put that forward. What I'm sharing is my view. It's a considered view, but it's still just my view. But I do think, I like this quote here from George Patton, where he says, if everyone's thinking the same thing, no one is thinking. I think that pretty much sums it up very, very tidily. So moving on, I think one of the biggest impacts on consumers right now is what we call the fear factor. Inflation is definitely come in. There's no question that we are seeing, 4.5%, sometimes even 7%, depends on the market that you're looking at. But it's not so much as being put forward that now consumers have no money, people are in dire straits. Yes, a certain subset of the market will be really facing a very grinding situation. People at a very low economic level, if you raise prices any amount, is going to throw them off the bus. But I think that when you look at anyone a little higher up the economic scale, where inflation weighs in is more on consumer sentiment. It's the psychological impact. I mean, nobody likes to see prices increase. When you go to a supermarket or you go to the gas station and you see prices are higher, you get that visceral bad feeling in the pit of your stomach. People just feel uneasy about that, even if they can afford to pay more, right? A person might spend, let's just say, I'm just making this up, $500 a month on food. And now there's 10% inflation, and now their food bill is $550. That is not going to necessarily derail every consumer out there. Many, many can afford to do that. But it's a bad feeling to see things go up. And it's like, oh, it's 10%. Well, it's only $50, but it's 10%. So people start to get nervous about that. And a nervous consumer is not someone who feels compelled to buy. When it comes to non-essentials, it's a bit different. You don't get that bad feeling when you go into a store and you see that the polo shirt that you used to pay $25 for is now 29. But you start to look at that shirt in a lot more critical view, even though the extra $4 may or may not be critical to your budget. In many cases, it might not be. But you look at that shirt in a very different way. You start feeling that fabric. You start looking at the workmanship. You start thinking about whether you really need it, whether you like it, whether you want it. It's different than when it was 25 and you just bought it because it looked good. So I think we want to keep that in mind. We want to really focus less on some of the numbers about inflation, which are oftentimes a basket, and we want to also factor into that consumer sentiment and understand how consumers are going to be approaching the market. So it's not surprising that we have a consumer today who is a lot more thoughtful, but also a lot less trusting. I think we can agree we are coming out of an era where worldwide consumer trust has been at a pretty low level. We won't go into that. It's not really necessarily relevant for what we're talking about now, but I think you understand what I mean. So how does that impact people's shopping habits? Fewer but better and less is more is a mindset that's been growing for over 10 years. We've been writing about this in Inside Fashion for over 10 years that I can recall. And it's the kind of thing that gains momentum. It doesn't happen overnight. But, first people start to talk about it, and then you start to see people making buying decisions in that direction. And I think that it's really come into force, in part, of course, because prices are going up, which creates somewhat of a speed bump. People are researching more before buying. The internet has made that very easy to do. And so people will look and read up on something, and then they'll make a decision, whether they're purchasing online or whether they're going to make that purchase in the store. There's a lot more label reading going on, and a lot more caring about quality, and people know quality. I often hear manufacturers and brands tell me, well, the consumer doesn't know anything about quality, really. They just want it to be cute and cheap. I would beg to differ with that. And they'll point to Gen Z or millennials, but we, over last summer, did a market research project where we interviewed a lot of different college students, mainly in the US, but also from Europe and some in Asia, and asked them questions, what they thought about sustainability, what they looked for when they were buying clothing, and so on and so forth. And it was quite interesting. Clips from that are on our website, so you're welcome to go over there and have a look at that. But it is interesting to understand that consumers are a lot more knowledgeable than we might give them credit for. So the shift to fewer but better, right? There's three key impacts. There's less desire for more. It used to be that you wanted to buy more. That was a good thing. We wanted to, whatever we had. If we had one pair of shoes, we wanted two. If we had two, we wanted three. We wanted more colors, more styles. But what happens when people have closets that are packed with clothes and lots of other stuff? Suddenly more is actually not as beneficial. It's not as rewarding to people. Now people are starting to think, rather than having so many things that are not really very nice, because a lot of more was being fueled by the fact that prices were very cheap, now you have a situation where people are saying, I'll shift my budget to getting fewer but better. And better doesn't necessarily mean jumping from budget all the way up to luxury, but it does mean looking for something that's somewhat better. So we're seeing this desire for less, and we're also seeing higher prices coming in. And at the same time, there's pressure to be sustainable. So that's also justifying why people, it's justifying why people can not buy. I didn't say that very eloquently, but basically it's giving people an excuse, so to speak, to justify not buying. So as we move on here, I like this quote. I think it sums it up. It's a quote from McKinsey. And again, this is someone outside of ourselves at Inside Fashion. And again, pointing to what they're seeing is that consumers are trying to move towards a better quality product. Now, the thing is, how do we define better, right? I mean, a lot of people say, oh, we've made our product better. but what does better mean? From whose perspective? I think it's very important to understand what better means to your particular customer. We can't generalize across many, many different customers in many different markets. In general, well, I'll preface this by saying that pre-pandemic, we used to do a lot of consumer surveys at Inside Fashion. During the pandemic, we stopped doing it. It was an atypical time. I don't think that what consumers were thinking in the midst of a pandemic necessarily represented a long-reaching sentiment. But in general, what consumers will tell you when you say to them, what do you look for when you shop for clothes, or what dissatisfies you? People will say they want better fit, more durable fabrics, and more unique styles. And I think that's a really important thing from the point of view that it's a broad enough thing that we know where we need to tackle it. And this is not just seniors or boomers or millennials. It's across basically all demographics, except probably, well, we didn't survey tweens or very young teens. So at the point where people are actually using their own money to buy things, yes, there is a demand that people are conscious of fit. They're conscious of how it looks on them. It can't just be trendy. People have a sense of, well, how does this look on me? Does it make me look fat? Does it make me look, does it make me look taller? Whatever they want to look, they care about that. And of course, durability is important. Nobody wants to have spent their money on something and see that it falls apart in short time. And more unique styles, of course, plays into consumer demand for greater personalization. So I would never tell you that price is not important. However, we can no longer come from the point of view where it's price first, where price is in the center and everything else is, after that. It's always like, we got to get to the price. We have to start to see a little bit of a balance between price and all these other touch points that consumers want. We may have to say, well, it'll be a little bit more expensive, but we're going to be packing it, fuller of quality, of durability, of more unique style. Consumers will pay more if they think they're getting something that's better. People will argue with me about that, but you see it all over. I mean, people are not only buying the cheapest possible thing out there in any category. So we can't really say that. We tend to think about, oh, they'll only buy the cheap thing when it comes to clothes. But I would say that we see an awful lot of people buying higher end products in clothing as well when they feel that there is that quality behind it, that style, whatever it is that they're looking for. And I think the other important factor here is that today, more than ever before, consumers will not buy something unless they really like the product. Previously, when we were in a very price-driven kind of a scenario, you could put it on sale, mark it down 50%, 70%, buy one, get the next one 50% off. People would say, oh yeah, what the heck? It's so cheap, I might as well get it. Now people are starting to say, I don't really need this. I don't like it. Yeah, I know it's on sale, but I don't really like it. I don't really need it. People are more comfortable with walking out empty-handed or abandoning cart. Previously, people would just figure, what the heck, and I'll go for it. I think more people are moving in the direction of being a lot more thoughtful. I often hear people say to me, Jane, you don't really get it. Millennials want this, Gen Z want that. Look at Shein, right? $100 billion valuation, right? That's proof of concept. I would say that a $100 billion valuation of a privately held company might not be necessarily 100% proof of concept, but I mean, it's impressive, and kudos to Shein for coming up with a brilliant business model, for being able to execute it on it. Absolutely. However, that does not define the entire consumer market. It does not define what every Gen Z is doing or every millennial is doing. It is just simply a subset. And I think that people will say to me, well, everyone of that generation is doing that. And yet at the same time, we know we're living at a time when this is a you do you kind of a mindset. It's like, you do your own thing, be your, dance to your own drum. There's far less of, well, everyone's doing that, so I'm going to do that too. Yes, a subset of people will want to have new outfits constantly and put them on Instagram or whatever they're doing. Absolutely. But there's just as many who aren't doing that and who are looking for something else. But when we generalize and when we start to hear this, as I pointed to earlier, the constant media reports, and right now it's all about Shein again and again and again and again, you start to think, well, that's the way it is. That, we need to go in that direction. We're doing everything wrong. No, not really. It's a big market. There's a lot of different niches within that market. We have to look at those subsets, because within those different subsets, there's many, many different opportunities. And just as Shein is doing very, very well, selling incredibly inexpensive clothing with constant new styles, Lululemon is doing very well also, selling high-end activewear. So, and there's many other examples. I won't take up your time with it. But I think you get my point. We can't listen to that noise and think that now the market has been redefined. So it comes down to knowing our customers a lot better. Well, nobody likes to do this kind of market research. Let's be honest. Even I'm negligent about doing this myself, even though I know better. It's a lot easier to rely on big data. You can just collect that data. You can throw it up on an Excel sheet or whatever you like to use. And you feel we know what's going on. We know what people are buying. And yes, you know what people who are buying from your particular store or your brand are buying. What you don't know are all the black holes, so to speak. You don't know why they bought that. Why did they choose this one over another one? You don't know why they didn't buy other items. I mean, they came into your store, they went onto your website, they bought one thing, why not another? You don't know what they would have bought had you offered it to them. You'd be surprised. I mean, I'm always surprised. I'm literally shocked when I talk to people and get feedback on different things. Really, absolutely amazed. But that's really where you're leaving money on the table. Things you think, oh, these guys would never want that. Well, maybe they would. I mean, you got to ask them. I'm not saying just go and invest in categories or products just randomly, but I think that it's important to do this kind of research, which is, like I said, it's tedious, it's grueling. If you have a shop, you're lucky, or a physical location, because people will be coming in and you can talk to them. You can have your team talk to them. You can set that as a goal. You got to talk to everyone who comes in and at least get that conversation going. And a lot of people won't have an answer, and some people will blow you off, but you learn a lot. You learn a lot. I mean, I learn a lot when I go into stores. And I'm talking to the people who are shop assistants there. It's just a habit I'm in, maybe because I work in this industry. I'll say to people, what are the best sellers now? Or if I'm in the department for jeans, I'll say, what are the ones everybody seems to like? What do they like about them? You learn a lot. You get a different perspective. It's interesting. The data will tell you, big data is important. It tells you a lot, but that soft data is critical. And that's where you can find a lot of money on the table. You understand what people like and don't like. And if you're able to really listen to that and respond to it, you can be the hero for that customer. Customer service, we're not really going to dive into this, but it's critical. Again, if people don't like to have to do customer market research, having to provide real people and that kind of service is something, wow, what gets cut first? This. But the companies that are, generally speaking, having the best customer loyalty and getting that engagement and building that ecosystem are the ones who are providing that live contact with people. I think if there's one thing people want these days, it's to be heard, to be recognized. People are calling out for that. If you show people a little bit of love, they'll want to buy your product. They'll come to stores even if everything in there isn't their favorite, but just because they feel good about it. I know that sounds crazy, but give it a try. It's important. Like I said, we're not going to dive into customer service, but it's something that needed to be said. It is a huge advantage. So I think if we look at 4 directions for this coming era, we don't know how long this era is going to be, but I think that when we look at it, it's important to stay in your lane. And I get the fact that when you have sales targets to meet, when you're under pressure, you start to start to second guess yourself, start to see what competitors are doing. It looks like they're making all the sales, they're making all the money. Maybe we should jump onto this. Maybe we should start to do that. But when you look at those companies that are doing the not only the volume, but also the margins, they always tend to have a narrow focus. Of course, Apple comes to mind. And we all know Apple. We know that they have a very limited product selection. We know that they limit the styles, the colors. They've been vigilant about this, and it's served them well. And I think that that's, amongst other things, quality and service and so forth, a lot to do with why they've been able to grab that market share and maintain that customer loyalty and ecosystem. So really, what products can you do better than anybody else? Not what can you do, but what could you be a hero at? Or what markets can you serve better than anybody else? Is there a subset of any of these demographics that's underserved and that's just crying out for somebody just to show them a little love? Could you be a hero for that customer? We're facing a challenging market, but it's a market that also has opportunities. And I hope that this short webinar enabled everyone to be able to get a little sharper picture on what's happening, where are some of the challenges, but also where are some of the opportunities. I think that we have to sometimes separate the news from the noise, so to speak. It's very difficult to pull yourself back from the echo chamber of the bombardment of constant emails coming into your inbox full of dire predictions and sensationalized headlines, and be able to see, well, what's the real picture here? So I hope that this webinar has shed some clarity on that. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I would love to hear from you. I'll be including an email address in the end screen, so feel free to contact me as you wish. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I will see you in the next webinar.